All right, so today we're diving into this potential 2024 election face-off. Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris.
You've sent over a ton of research for this one.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
it's a
okay.
big one. It's a return to the past versus, a push for change kind of deal.
Yeah, total.
Two very different visions.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how both of them really embody these totally different
Yeah.
eras in American politics,
Yeah.
Trump really tapped into this populism wave
Right.
back in 2016.
Yeah.
And it really looks like he's aiming to ride that same wave again.
Mm.
And then you've got Harris, who represents this, kind of newer generation of leadership.
Yeah.
And that's way more focused on inclusivity and, systemic change.
Okay, let's unpack Trump first.
Sure.
So we know his whole drain the swamp thing.
Right.
And those populist policies really did resonate with certain voter base back in 2016.
For sure.
But one of the things that you sent over, a Pew Research study,
Okay.
points out that while his approval rating stayed pretty steady among his core supporters during his presidency,
Mm-hmm.
they never really broke through to a wider audience.
And that's key. Trump's base is for sure loyal. But to win in 2024, he really needs to recapture some of those voters who,
Oh, yeah.
were drawn to that outsider status back in 2016.
Yeah.
But ultimately, were maybe a little disillusioned
Yeah.
with his policies or, just how he was in office.
Right. Okay, so it seems like immigration, trade, and deregulation are going to be those big talking points again.
Yeah, it sounds familiar, right?
Yeah. But this time around, it's a different economic landscape.
For sure.
Some of your sources from The Economist
Okay.
suggest that this global economic slowdown
Uh-huh.
could actually play in his favor.
Interesting.
That voters might be looking for someone who promises to shake things up,
Promises to shake things up.
even if that means going back to some of his more protectionist policies.
That's definitely a possibility, but there's also that risk.
Yeah.
Those policies, like, those trade wars that happened during his first term
Yeah.
could actually make the economic instability worse.
Right.
And, this time around, he's not an unknown quantity.
Right.
Voters have a much clearer understanding
Yeah.
of how those policies actually play out in the real world.
Okay, so potential upside for Trump in a struggling economy, but also a lot more scrutiny of his past performance.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's turn to Kamala Harris now.
Okay,
I mean, we can't ignore how historic her potential candidacy is.
of course.
I mean, first woman,
Yeah,
first Black person, first South Asian vice president.
right. Groundbreaking.
But beyond that, what kind of vision is she putting forward?
Well, from what you've sent, it looks like her campaign is going to really emphasize those progressive values,
Okay.
building on, what the Biden administration has already been doing.
Yeah.
But with her own focus on things like criminal justice reform,
Right.
climate action, expanding access to health care.
And one article that you sent from The Atlantic
Yes.
specifically mentioned her push for Green New Deal initiative. And they suggested that while this could energize younger voters and those concerned about climate change,
Yeah.
it might alienate moderates or those in industries
Right.
that would be threatened by a quick shift away from fossil fuels.
Absolutely. And, it's worth noting that she has faced some criticism,
Yeah.
even from within her own party,
Right.
about her record as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
Some people argue that her tough-on-crime stance in the past
Yeah.
really contradicts what she's calling for now with criminal justice reform.
Right.
So how she addresses that
Yeah.
perceived inconsistency, I think, could be key in her campaign.
Yeah, it sounds like she's walking this tightrope,
Kind of, yeah.
trying to appeal to both progressives and moderates without alienating either group.
Yeah. She needs to find that balance.
Right, and then let's not forget the challenges that she's facing as the incumbent VP.
Yeah.
The materials you shared mentioned those lower than expected poll numbers
Right.
and a sense that she hasn't been as visible
Yeah.
or as effective as some had hoped.
And those are hurdles she's definitely going to have to overcome.
Yeah.
But, there's also a potential advantage
Yeah.
to being the incumbent.
Okay.
You sent a Gallup poll that indicates that a good chunk of voters just want things to go back to normal
Yeah.
after all the, ups and downs of the Trump years.
Right.
So Harris might be able to really capitalize on that desire
Yeah.
for a back-to-normal presidency, especially if the economy keeps struggling.
So it sounds like the economy could be a major factor in this election,
Huge, yes.
influencing both Trump's potential resurgence and Harris's ability to solidify her own base.
For sure.
Okay, so let's get into the details of their policies. starting with how they plan to address
Okay.
the very real concerns that voters have about their wallets.
Yeah, let's talk money.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. The economy is like the #1 thing for a lot of voters.
Uh-huh.
And you've sent some really interesting stuff about how Trump and Harris might approach it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with Trump.
Okay.
So we know from his last term that he's really into deregulation.
Yeah, one of the articles you sent from Forbes suggests that he might try to roll back
Wow.
some of those financial regulations that were put in place after that 2008 crisis.
Right.
I'm curious about what the impact of that could be.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, it could mean more investment and, economic growth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it could mean, another financial meltdown.
It's a gamble for sure.
Right.
And it's one that might appeal to voters who feel like the system is rigged against them.
Yeah.
They might see deregulation as a way to kind of level the playing field,
Mm-hmm.
even if it comes with that added risk.
Right. And then there's taxes.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Trump's signature policy during his first term was that huge tax cut. That mainly helped corporations and wealthy individuals.
Yeah.
Your sources from the Tax Policy Center indicate that he's probably going to propose similar cuts if he's elected again.
Which makes you wonder how those cuts would be funded.
Right.
Would they lead to cuts in social programs?
Yeah.
Or would they just add to the national debt?
Right.
These are things that voters will need to really look at closely,
Yeah.
when they're trying to figure out his economic plan.
Okay, so deregulation and tax cuts, those seem to be the main points of Trump's economic approach.
Yeah.
What about Harris?
Okay.
What kind of plan is she likely to present?
So from the stuff you've given me, it seems like she's going to focus on investing in infrastructure,
Okay.
clean energy,
Mm-hmm.
and education.
Okay.
There's a report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and they say that these investments could create jobs, boost economic growth,
Right.
and help with those long-term challenges
Mm-hmm.
like climate change and income inequality.
It definitely sounds like a more long-term sustainable approach
Right.
compared to Trump's focus on those immediate tax cuts and deregulation.
Yeah, but it does make you wonder about the cost.
Right.
These kinds of investments mean big government spending,
Yeah.
which could result in higher taxes or bigger deficits.
That's where it gets interesting.
Right.
Voters are going to have to weigh those potential benefits against the potential costs.
Exactly.
Do they want a quick fix that might, help the economy in the short term?
Yeah.
Or are they willing to invest in a more sustainable future, even if it means giving something up now?
It's a tough choice.
It is.
And it really shows what each candidate stands for.
Okay, so we talked about the economy, which is obviously a big deal.
Huge.
Let's move on to something else that's probably going to be front and center in this election.
Healthcare.
Healthcare. That's always a hot topic.
Yeah.
And this election is going to be no different.
Right.
Your research points out the big difference between how Trump and Harris approach it.
Yeah.
Trump's been very vocal about his dislike of the Affordable Care Act.
Also known as Obamacare.
Yeah.
And he's tried to repeal it over and over again.
Yeah. One of the articles from the Kaiser Family Foundation points out that he hasn't really offered any kind of alternative plan.
Right.
It's more about getting rid of what's there than giving a clear idea for what he would do.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
And it makes voters wonder what would actually happen if he did manage to get rid of the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
Would people lose their health insurance?
Mm-hmm.
Would pre-existing conditions not be covered anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things that people worry about when it comes to healthcare.
Right.
Now, on the other side, you've got Harris, who's been really supportive of giving more people access to healthcare.
Yeah. One of the articles that you shared from Vox mentioned her support for that Medicare for All type system.
Right.
Although she hasn't actually said she's fully behind that specific plan.
It's important to remember that Medicare for All is a single-payer system.
Okay.
Which means the government would be the only one paying for healthcare services. It's a big change from what we have now, and it's definitely controversial.
Yeah. The stuff you sent has a lot of different opinions on Medicare for All.
Yes.
Some say it would give everyone coverage and lower costs, but others are worried about the government being too involved and, possible disruptions to the current system.
The complicated issue.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Right.
And it'll probably be a big point of disagreement during the campaign.
Yeah.
Voters have to decide if they're okay with a government-run healthcare system.
Right.
Or if they'd rather stick with what we have now, even with its problems.
It's interesting how the healthcare debate always comes back to that question of trust.
Totally.
Do you trust the government to take care of your healthcare?
Yeah.
Or do you trust private insurers?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's a question that goes beyond just healthcare.
Yeah.
It applies to other policies too.
Okay, so we've covered the economy
Uh,
and healthcare.
yeah.
Let's move on to another really important area,
Yeah.
foreign policy.
Foreign policy.
It might not seem as urgent as the economy or healthcare,
Right.
but it has a huge impact on our lives.
Definitely.
And the difference between Trump and Harris on this is pretty big.
Yeah.
Trump's America First thing really shook things up when he was president.
Yeah.
He pulled out of those international agreements,
Right.
put tariffs in place,
Mm-hmm.
and, kind of pushed allies away. It was
Yeah.
a very, transactional, go it alone kind of foreign policy.
Yeah.
One of the articles from Foreign Affairs says that his approach hurt America's global standing
Mm-hmm.
and made rivals like Russia and China bolder.
Right.
It says he's likely to do the same thing if he's reelected.
So the question is, how would the rest of the world react to that?
Yeah.
Would they see another Trump term as America stepping back from its leadership role?
Yeah.
Could it lead to more instability and conflict?
Now, on the other side, you've got Harris, who seems to prefer working with other countries when it comes to foreign policy. Putting diplomacy first.
One of your sources, a report from the Council on Foreign Relations,
Mm-hmm.
says that she would try to fix relationships with allies,
Yeah.
get back into those international organizations,
Mm-hmm.
and prioritize diplomacy over using the military.
It sounds like a pretty big change in direction.
It does.
But it also makes you wonder if she can actually make it work.
Right.
In a world that's so complicated and unpredictable.
And she doesn't have a ton of foreign policy experience.
Right.
Being vice president has given her some, but she'll have to show she can handle those global issues.
Okay, so two very different approaches to foreign policy.
Yeah.
Trump's America First versus Harris's more collaborative way.
Right.
It's another example of how this election gives voters a clear choice about where they want the country to go.
Exactly. And we got to remember that foreign policy isn't just about, big, complicated global stuff.
Right.
It affects our economy, our safety, and our values as a country.
You sent some stuff about social media, and I think it's safe to say that it played a big part in 2016.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it's probably going to be even more important in 2024.
Definitely you're right to bring that up.
Yeah.
Social media is like the main place people get their news.
Yeah.
But it's also where a lot of misinformation and polarization comes from.
One of the articles you sent from the MIT Technology Review talked about those deep fakes.
Oh, yeah, those are scary.
Those videos that are manipulated to make it look like someone is saying or doing something they never actually did.
Those are a really sneaky form of misinformation.
Yeah.
Because they can be so hard to spot.
Mm-hmm.
And they can really make people distrust things and cause chaos during an election.
It's like a whole new level of information warfare.
It really is.
And then it's not just deep fakes. There's the whole algorithm thing, creating those filter bubbles that just reinforce what we already believe.
Right.
And make it hard to see other points of view.
One of your sources, a Pew study, found that people who mostly get their news from social media are more likely to see misinformation.
Right.
And less likely to come across different viewpoints.
So it seems like social media is both a good thing and a bad thing for this election.
Yeah, definitely two sides to that coin.
It's a powerful tool for candidates to connect with voters.
Yeah.
But it can also be used to spread lies and manipulate people.
It's up to each of us to be smart about the information we see online.
Right.
We need to be critical of what we see.
Yeah.
Check our sources and be aware of our own biases.
Okay, so we've talked about the candidates, their policies, and social media, but there's something else we need to talk about.
What's that?
The political climate in America.
You're talking about the big elephant in the room?
Yeah.
That partisan divide that's been growing for years?
Exactly. It feels like the country is more divided than ever.
Yeah.
And it's making it hard to have normal conversations about important things.
One of your sources, a book by Ezra Klein.
It says this polarization is caused by a bunch of things.
Like what?
Identity politics, the decline of local news,
right,
and the growing influence of social media.
It's like we're living in two separate worlds.
It really is.
Each with its own set of facts and values.
And that makes it harder to find common ground and work together.
Exactly.
So it's super important to know our own biases, to look for different perspectives, and to talk to each other respectfully even when we don't agree.
It's easy to get caught up into anger and negativity.
It is.
But we have to remember that we're all Americans.
Yeah.
And we all care about the future of this country.
And that future depends on the choices we make in this election.
Right.
So let's encourage each other to be informed, to think things through, and to vote for the kind of America we want to live in.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
The economy, healthcare, foreign policy.
Yeah.
Social media, the political climate.
But there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up.
Okay.
The candidates themselves.
Oh.
Their backgrounds, their experiences, and how those might affect how they would be as president.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's not just about their policies.
Right.
It's about who they are and what they bring to the table.
Let's start with Trump.
Okay.
His background as a businessman and his time on reality TV have definitely shaped his approach to politics.
They have.
He's a showman, a deal maker.
Yeah.
And he's great at self-promotion.
A master.
One of your sources, a biography by Michael Wolff, describes Trump as someone who's impulsive, transactional, and more interested in winning than actually governing.
That's a pretty interesting picture.
Yeah.
It's both fascinating and a little worrisome.
Yeah. It makes you wonder about his temperament and if he's really fit to be president.
Yeah.
And you have Harris, who comes from a totally different background. As a former prosecutor and senator, she's really familiar with the legal system and how politics works. She's known for being really smart, for being prepared, and for being able to explain complicated things really well. An article from The New Yorker describes her as someone who's practical and more interested in finding solutions than playing political games.
It's a big contrast.
It is.
The Trump the outsider
right.
versus Harris the insider.
Yeah, and that difference is probably going to be on full display during the whole campaign.
Most likely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've looked at the issues, the candidates, and the whole context of this election. Now I want to turn it back to you, the listener. So we've really gone deep on potential policies, the economic landscape, even social media's impact.
It's a lot to consider.
It is. And what stands out to you from all these sources?
I think what really hits me is just how many crossroads America's facing right now. You know, you've said articles on everything. Climate change, worries, economic anxiety, social justice movements, even how global power is shifting.
Right. It's a lot.
This election isn't just about picking a president. It's about picking a direction for the whole country.
And at a pretty crucial time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is.
It can feel overwhelming trying to make sense of it all.
For sure.
But that's why we do these deep dives.
Yeah.
To help cut through the noise.
Exactly. And the most important thing is, you know, you being informed and participating.
Right.
Your sources show a bunch of different viewpoints, and that's so important. Don't just stick with one side. Challenge yourself to understand the arguments from everyone.
It's like we said before.
Yeah.
It's not about picking a team. It's about choosing a future.
Exactly.
What kind of America do we want to see years from now?
Right. What values should guide us, you know, when we're dealing with other countries? How do we balance growing the economy with social justice?
Right.
And taking care of the environment?
These are the questions we need to be thinking about.
Definitely. And there aren't any easy answers.
Right.
There's going to have to be compromised, tough choices.
Yeah.
And these conversations are going to keep happening.
Right.
But that's what's great about a democracy we all get to be part of, shaping our future.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
I
want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay.
Take what you've learned from these sources, from what we've talked about, what you've been thinking about, and have those tough conversations. Talk to your friends, family, colleagues, even people you don't agree with.
Right.
Listen, learn, and share your own perspective.
Your voice matters.
Yeah.
Your vote matters.
Yeah.
And America's future depends on the choices we make, both on our own and together.
That's it for our deep dive into the 2024 election.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, and remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.